Some of the toughest moments in life occur when we have lost everything. And I wonder sometimes what happens and where do we turn to when those moments happen. My family's favorite movie right now is called The Greatest Showmen. And if you've never watched it, you should. I'm going to spoil parts of it here, so sorry. There is a guy by the name of P.T. Barnum of Barnum and Bailey Circus fame that the movie centers around. And throughout this movie, he's trying to get the accolades of the upper crust. And to do this, he ends up borrowing money, money that he doesn't have. So he gets a loan to open up his Museum of American Curiosities, which was later on named the Circus. And he's constantly doing things, and he's in the business of selling falsehood, if you will. He has the tallest man. He has the heaviest man. He has the greatest singer in the world. And each time he goes out and he borrows money to get bigger and better and greater shows so that people will appreciate him. And every time that he feels like he's not appreciated by the upper society, he will go out and he will get more and more until finally, at the end of the movie, it all comes crumbling in on him. The circus burns and he doesn't have money to rebuild it. His wife leaves him because of some things that are happening within this cycle that he was in. And he's basically left at a point in the movie where he has lost everything. And I ask the question, when we have lost everything, where do we go? The man by the name of Horatio Spafford lived in the 1800s, the late 1800s. He was a businessman from Chicago, and he had a good life. He had a wife, they had 5 children, his business was booming, and things were going great. And then something happened in 1871. In 1871, his only son passed away unexpectedly. And also, that was the year of the Great Chicago Fire. And so this business that he had built up from the ground up burned down to ashes. He was able to rebuild it a little bit, and his family decided to take a vacation in November of 1873 to Europe. And so he got his wife and his children on board a French passenger liner that was heading off to Europe, and he had some business things that he had to finish up, and so he got them on board and was going to meet up with them in a couple weeks. That French ocean liner was hit by a Scottish iron ship by the name of the Loch Earn, and the ocean liner sank. A rescue boat came by trying to pick up anyone they could find, and the only one that they were able to find was Horatio's wife, Anna. And they landed in Cardiff, Wales, having lost all of their children, and Anna messaged her husband and said, "I'm the lone survivor. What do you want me to do?" And we ask the question, when we've lost everything, what do we do? This is a question I think is important. It's a question I think our society is asking. It's a question that we have to have answers for ourselves. Because at some point in our lives, we might find ourselves having lost everything and left with this question, what do I do now? Society has lots of answers for this. Some people in society think that the answer is it's time to give up. And it's just too much, that maybe you should just go live on the streets, or maybe you should just end it all. Others in society say, well, no, you got to pick yourself up by the bootstraps and get back on that horse, which is easier said than done. When we've lost everything, we have more questions than there are answers for. When we have lost everything, what do we do? We're in this series that we're looking at the life of Jacob, and today we're going to be in Genesis chapter 28. If you have your Bibles, I would invite you to open up to Genesis chapter 28. And throughout this series, we've been looking at the imperfections that are in Jacob's lives, and there's a lot of them. And it all started from his birth. He was the second-born son, and as a result, in his society, that meant he was not as good as his firstborn brother. He was the second to inherit. He would have been the second to get a blessing. He would have been the second at everything. And his dad made him feel that way. His dad loved Esau, the older son, more than he loved Jacob, and Jacob felt that. And so Jacob did everything in his power to trick, deceive, and lie his way to the top. He tricked his brother into the birthright of inheritance so he would have that first inheritance. He tricked his dad into giving the firstborn blessing to him. And so everything that Jacob has been doing, he's been doing to get higher up in society. But it's left brokenness behind in its path. The relationship that Jacob now had with his father was completely broken. His dad could no longer trust him. You've just tricked me, a blind man, into giving you my blessing. His brother's relationship is also broken. Esau wants to kill Jacob for all the things that Jacob has done to him. Jacob, in a real sense, has lost everything. His mom is even now coming to him and saying, you know what? I think the best thing for you to do right now is to leave and never come back. All these things that Jacob has been working towards, in an instant, they're gone. He's lost everything. And we ask the question, when we have lost everything, what do we do? Well, Rebecca, his mom, has an idea of what she wants to do. She comes to Jacob and says, Jacob, you need to leave. But Jacob just can't leave because if he leaves, he'll be admitting his guilt in the situation that has just happened. And so Rebecca has a plan of what she is going to do and how she is going to get Jacob out of there alive because she still loves him. Her relationship with Jacob is not broken. It's just messed up in little ways. And so in the very last verse of chapter 27, we read these words. Rebekah said to Isaac, I'm disgusted with living among these Hittite women. If Jacob takes a wife from among the women of this land, from Hittite women like these, my life will not be worth living. And so Rebekah's plan is to get rid of Jacob, but to get rid of it with an excuse for him to leave and not admit his guilt in the problems. And she says, I cannot continue to live this way. She goes to Isaac and says, I can't live like this. If Jacob takes a wife among these women, it's over. Now, we're not told why. We don't know why this is the case. There's a lot of ideas out there, but the one that I think I like the best is probably the religious feelings of the Hittite women. See, Isaac follows God, the only one true God. And Rebekah probably has a relationship with that God as well, as we see earlier in Jacob's story where she goes to God in the midst of her pregnancy asking, why is this happening? And so she has a relationship with God, but the Hittite women, they don't. Culturally, they're a little bit different than she is. Religiously, they're way different than she is. And she knows how it will affect Jacob if he were to marry one of them. And the reason she knows this is because her oldest son, Esau, he's already married two of these Hittite women. She's already seen how they've influenced her oldest son. Women have influence over their husbands. They change them. Whether that be for the good or for the bad, they change their spouse. And so it's important for Rebekah that Jacob not marry one of these women, but rather he marries someone else. And so she goes to Isaac and says, Isaac, this is too much. He cannot marry one of them. We need to send him away. And it doesn't take Isaac much convincing, because if you read earlier in the story, you see that Isaac has the same issue. He has the same problem with these Hittite women. And so he is going to call in Jacob. He knows what's going on in the background. He knows the relationships that have been broken, and he's going to have the same suggestion that Rebekah has to send Jacob away. But before he does that, he's going to give Jacob a command and a blessing. And we read about this command and the blessing in Genesis chapter 28, starting in verses 1 and 2. Isaac called for Jacob, and he blessed him, and then he commanded him, here's the command, do not marry a Canaanite woman. Go at once to Paddan Aram, to the house of your mother's father Bethuel. Take a wife for yourself from there, from among the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. So he commands him to leave, to go away, to head off, and not to marry one of these women. He's to go to Paddan Aram, which is located in the far north of where they lived, and this would have taken months for them to travel. He's to go to Laban, Rebekah's brother, and it may be to marry one of his daughters, but it may just be to marry one of his household, which would have included a larger group of people. And so he wants him to go there because those women are better. It's where Rebekah came from. That's a better choice than the Hittites. And so he says, go off. Rebekah is successful. She's convinced Isaac. Now Jacob has an excuse to leave, and everything is going to go well. And then we get the blessing in verses 3 and 5. He says, may God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and increase your numbers until you become a community of peoples. May he give you and your descendants the blessing given to Abraham so that you may take possession of the land where you now reside as a foreigner, the land God gave to Abraham. And then Isaac sent Jacob on his way, and he went to Paddan Aram to Laban, son of Bethuel the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, who was the mother of Jacob and Esau. And so he blesses Jacob before he leaves. And there's really two parts to this blessing. The first part of the blessing is to be fruitful and to multiply. It's really all connected to God's blessing of Abraham. See, when God called Abraham, he told Abraham to look up into the night sky and to see all the stars that are there. And he says, however many stars there are, that's how many descendants you're going to have, Abraham. The problem was Abraham had issues getting his wife pregnant. In fact, he and his wife were only able to have one son, Isaac. And Isaac had problems himself. He and Rebekah had issues. They only had one set of twins. And so at this rate, it's going to take millions of years for them to have as many descendants as the stars in the heaven. And so Isaac blesses his son and says, I hope that God blesses you more than he blessed me in this. May you have the descendants. And so it comes back to this blessing of Abraham, and the Abrahamic blessing is the second part of it as well. May they possess this land. See, God had told Abraham and Isaac, this land that you live in that doesn't belong to you right now, it is going to be yours. I am going to give it to you. But to fill the land, you need lots of descendants. And so for right now, it is not theirs. It belongs to other people, but God had promised it to them. And so God's promises that had been passed down from Abraham to Isaac now are fully in Jacob's hands. And Jacob leaves. And he heads off to Paddan Aram. And a few things are going to happen here. First, Jacob will never see his mom again. Rebekah will die in the time that Jacob is in Paddan Aram with Laban. And when Jacob returns, his father will literally be on his deathbed and have one last thing to say to Jacob before he dies. So this is the last meaningful conversation that he has with his parents before he leaves. We see that he's losing a lot of things in this. He's losing his comfort. Isaac is really rich. Jacob has spent his entire life in the tents. He's not had to do all of the manual labor stuff that the servants were there for. He's had a cushy life. And yet now he's being asked to leave it all, to go to somewhere else. All these things that he's been working for, all these plans that he's set out to get the inheritance, he'll not see a dime of it because he won't be around when Esau takes over. He's lost all of his comforts. He's going to lose all of his friends, what little friends he probably has. See, they don't have a postal system. There's no way for them to communicate over long distance. He probably will have no idea that his mom's dead until he comes back. His life is about to change drastically. He is literally homeless. His father has kicked him out, said, go find your uncle Laban, and maybe Laban will accept you. Because there's no guarantee that when Laban finds out who Jacob is, that Laban says, yeah, come on in. He is literally homeless. And he's to travel the great distance from where they're at in Beersheba all the way to Paddan Aram. And in this land, there's lots of people that are okay with killing others. There are robbers, there are thieves, there are wild animals, and there's a very good likelihood that Jacob will die on the journey to where he is going, and he has no one there to watch his back. Jacob, in a very real sense, has lost everything. Everything is gone. He is alone. He's scared. I can just imagine in his head, he is asking all kinds of questions. What if? What if Laban doesn't accept me? What if I don't make it there? What if I never see my dad again? What if? What if? And as he's contemplating these things, something spectacular happens. We read about it in verse 10. We're told that Jacob left Beersheba and he set out for Haran, which is one of the cities of Paddan Aram. And when he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. And taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. And he had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. He gets tired on his way up there. It's been a long journey, and he decides to sleep for the night at a certain spot, and he gets there, and he finds a stone, which seems kind of uncomfortable, but really having some support for your neck when you sleep is better than none. And so I can just imagine having to sleep on this stone. And as he's sleeping, he dreams. And dreams are weird, dreams are strange, dreams are sometimes hard to understand, and this one is no different. He dreams about a ladder. Ladder is a better translation than stairway. Maybe you've heard of Jacob's ladder, and this is what it's referencing. He dreams of a ladder sitting on earth and reaching up into the heavens, and angels of God ascending and descending back and forth, back and forth. And we have to ask, what is going on? What does this mean? And I think if we understand Jacob's life to this point, we can have a firm understanding of what this message and this dream is meant for Jacob. Jacob, for his entire life, has been focused on himself. He's been focused on number one, and that's it. You know, he wasn't the firstborn son. He wasn't the one that was looked out by his dad. And so he went out of his way to get that birthright inheritance, to get that number one spot, so that maybe, just maybe, Isaac would look at him a little different. And so he devised a plan to make stew when his brother is really hungry and get his brother to do something that he wasn't thinking straight on. And he deceives and lies his way into that spot. And then it comes to this blessing of Abraham that's been centered on over the last couple of chapters. And he again deceives his father, a blind man, into giving him the blessing rather than his brother. Why? Why would Jacob go to elaborate measures to get it? And the only thing that I can think of is this, is that when his plan to get his daddy's love didn't go well, the next best thing is maybe to get God to love me. And he's been working through all of this to get into this position where maybe God will look at him a little bit different. And yes, he's done it in bad ways, and yes, it's left a mess behind him. But it's been his efforts. And what we see in the ladder that Jacob is dreaming is that the ladder comes from heaven, resting on the earth, and God is the one that sends his messengers to the earth. And the truth that we need to learn is that it doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter how hard we work. Ultimately, it is God that does the things for us. God is the one that initiates the process. It is God that has chosen this family, not the family choosing God. It is God that has chosen to bless them. It will be God that leads the Israelites out of Egypt. It will be God that conquers this land that's so important in this story. It is God that sends the Messiah. It is God who calls us to be in relationship with him. It's not what we do, it's what God does. And God is trying to communicate to Jacob, Jacob, stop. Stop. And trust that I got this. So many times the reasons why we're in the situations that we're in is because we have made bad choices. We are imperfect. And through our own efforts, through our own schemes, we've tried to promote ourselves, and it's just left us broken. And God is trying to say to us, stop. I got this. And in the midst of this dream, God speaks to Jacob, and he says this in verses 13 and 15. Therefore, there above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, the God of Isaac, and I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you, and I will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back into this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised. Do you hear what God says? I will do this. And it's interesting to note that the things that Jacob is going through in this moment, in this imperfect time of his life, are all things that God addresses. Jacob, I know that you feel alone, that you have no good relationship with your family, that your friends are all behind you right now. I know that you're by yourself in the middle of a period of life where you just don't know what is going to happen next. And God says, I will be there. I am with you. Jacob, I know that you are homeless, that you have no place to lay down, you have no place to call your own, you have no tent, you have no house, you have no one there, you have no home. You've lost everything. But I will provide, and I will give you this land. He says, I know, Jacob, that there's no one there to protect you, no one to get your back. You're up against the wall. You have no idea what's going to happen next and who's going to attack you next. But don't worry, Jacob, because I am there. And I will protect you. And I will see you through. Everything that Jacob is going through, God addresses. And in the midst of losing everything, God is there. And what I think we learn from this story is this spectacular truth that God provides perfect presence in the midst of imperfect times of our lives. God is there when it seems like no one else is. God is there when we have nowhere else to turn to. God is there when all of our friends have left us. God is there when we have nothing that we can give back to Him. God is there by our side, and Jacob finds this out in his life. When he's broken, when he has nothing, God was there for him. And God promises Jacob his presence to be there, to guide him, to walk alongside him, to bring him into this good time that is in front of him. And these promises that God gives to Jacob, they are promises that we can latch onto. They are promises that we read about in the New Testament for us as Christians. When we are called out to do work for God, and as we are doing the work for God, there are going to be lonely times in our lives. There's going to be times where people draw away from us because of the work that we're doing to promote the kingdom. When we're preaching Jesus and people leave us, God is still there. Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 28. He says, "Surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." And we have a promise that God is going to be with us when we feel all alone, when our friends have deserted us, when our family relationships are broken, even when we have messed up, even when we have sinned and caused these things to happen. God promises to be with us when we are on mission for Him. He didn't just send us out and say, "Hey, good luck, figure it out." God said, "No, I'm with you. Always. Forever." There are times that we're going to feel like we have nothing, where maybe we are homeless, or maybe we don't know where the next meal is coming from, or how we're going to pay our bills, and we're going to be in this place where we don't know what is happening next, and God says, "I will provide." So Paul had to deal with this. Paul, talking to the Philippians, will say, "Hey, I've been through it where I've had lots, and I've been able to feed myself, and it's been a good time. I've also been through it where I've had very little, and I had to rely on people to help me out. And through both of these situations, I've learned one truth, and that one truth," he says in Philippians 4, is this: "I can do all things through Him who gives me strength." Talking about his financial situations, he says, Jesus is there providing for me, giving me strength to endure in these moments of broken times. There are moments where we're going to feel like we have no one that has our back, where we need protection from people and what they're saying to us, where we need somebody to step in and stand in front of us, where we have our backs to the wall. And it's in those moments that God says, "I will be there and I will protect you." I love the way the author of Romans says it in Romans chapter 8. He says, "What then shall we say about all these things? If God is for us, who can be against us?" If we have the God of the universe, the creator of everything that we see, the one who said to Jacob, "I will guide you through your lives," if He is on our side, then we have all the protection we need. And so these brokenness that Jacob is facing, the brokenness that we have in our lives, the imperfect times that we face, in those times when we have lost everything, there is only one thing that we can do, and that is turn to God. Not to give up, not to pull ourselves back up onto the horse, but turn to God and let God take over. And let God be in control. This scene will change Jacob just a little bit. And it will stick with him for the rest of his story that we'll see throughout the next couple of weeks. And Jacob, he wakes up and he realizes that something spectacular has happened here. And so he builds an altar and he pours oil on it as a sacrifice to God. And he says, "This is now the house of God, Bethel." And he says, "I love this fact that God has come to me." But then he makes this vow, and I want us to read the vow in verses 20 and 21. It says, "Jacob made a vow saying, 'If God will be with me, and if He will watch over me on this journey that I am taking, and if He will give me food and clothes to wear so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God.'" And so Jacob's reaction to these promises that God has just given to him, to this dream that he has just witnessed, is this: if God fulfills his promises, then I will follow him. And I think it's important to see Jacob's reaction to gauge ourselves, because the promises that God has spoken to Jacob, they're spoken to us later in the New Testament, and they're meant for us now. And we get an option on how we're going to react, how we're going to respond to those promises. Are we going to fully commit to God before we see the realization of the promises, or will we be like Jacob and say, you know what? I got to see it first. See, the promises that God gives us, they're promises for those who are fully committed. And we don't get the luxury of Jacob to stand in the middle and say, We have to choose to either be all in or all out. There is no middle ground. And so the question you have to ask yourself is this: are you all in? Because there are going to be imperfect times in your lives. There are going to be moments where you need God's perfect presence. And if you're all out, it probably won't be there. We have a God who loves us, a God we are completely undeserving of, a God who comes in the midst of our imperfect times because of the mistakes that we've made and says, I am there and I will guide you through it. And we cannot afford to be like Jacob. We need to commit to be all in. And this half-hearted commitment of Jacob, it's going to affect what happens in the next chapter, in the next part of his life. And so he's going to have this messy situation because he hasn't fully committed to God. And so we get the choice. Do we want to fully commit to God, or do we want to be like Jacob and have mess in our lives? It's your choice. When you've lost everything, the only place you can turn to is God. Let's pray. Dear God, in the midst of our brokenness, in the midst of our imperfection, we just ask that we feel your presence. We just ask that you take our hand and that you guide us to the place that you desire us to be. And Father, we know that sometimes the brokenness is a result of what we've done. And we know that we've made mistakes along the way and that we have messed up and caused issues. I pray, God, that in our lives, even though we are broken and imperfect, that your perfectness will come in and that you'll be with us, that you will fulfill these promises that you've given us, that you'll be there, that you'll provide, that you will protect. Help us to be fully committed to you, to fully rely on you and your word. I ask this in your name. Amen.